Now you're welcome, Max. So, as has been the case over the last couple of weeks, in lieu of not having any Premier League commentary, we've been speaking to top-level footballers at this time every Sunday. And I'm delighted to welcome our next guest to the show. He made a name for himself at Shamrock Rovers under John Giles and Eamon Dunphy. He was the last signing Bob Paisley ever made. He joined Liverpool in 1983. His time there included the double of 1986, an FA Cup final win over Everton. Sadly, injury is a part of the story, as I'm sure you know. A leg break in 1987 proved a huge obstacle. He left for Leeds United in 1989 and retired aged just 27 in 1991. He also, of course, played for the Republic 15 times, and he is a very familiar face and voice across the media these days. Jim Beglin, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Joe. It's good to be here. I'm the one with the sob story.
In some ways, I mean, life doesn't seem too bad at the moment. And importantly, I suspect you've managed to look at the bright side.
Yeah, I've always been that type of person, thankfully. I've always been glass half full. If ever you suffer a disappointment or a setback in life, you have to move on. Because if you don't, if you stall or if you go a little backwards, everything goes past you so fast. And I quickly realized that when I had to change things in my career, that I couldn't sulk anymore. I went through, a period of self-pity, but I had to get on with it, and I had to put all that away and forget about it. And only on occasions when people, and maybe you'll do it through this, but when people ask me to dwell on things and to go back and to really kind of, go back into how I felt at that time, then it maybe kind of brings up some negativity. But no, I'm generally a positive person, and always looking for the good side of things.
Well, I saw an interesting quote you gave to the 42 website. You were speaking to Paul Fennessy a couple of years ago, and you said, "My son brings it up from time to time." Tackle. My son brings it up from time to time, and he'll kind of get me going again. Does your son bring it up in kind of anger on your behalf? Is it?
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he gets really frustrated that I didn't get to complete my career as I would have preferred. He's eased off on it now because I think he realizes that I've dealt with it in a certain way and that I won't react. Because if you succumb to bitterness, then it just eats away at you. It really has no effect on anybody else involved or anything like that. It's just not a good way to be. It's not a good way to try and get through life, to keep drumming up those thoughts, of the bad times and the setbacks. So I think he knows now that I compartmentalize things, that, that if it is a negative part of my life, then I'll put it away and I won't let it come out of the box I've inserted it in. So he's much easier on me these days, but occasionally he still tries to stir it, but he's not as persistent anymore, thankfully.
I hadn't planned to start the interview with this at all. It's amazing how we've gone down this route. So I might park it for a while, and then there's so many other things I wanted to talk to you about. Like, I noticed you enjoy your Twitter, and #Jim has been going, or #AskJim has been going, which is great for me as an interviewer because I get to go and see what people are throwing your way. Favorite chipper in Tramore? Cunningham's. So tell me about Cunningham's and life in Tramore growing up.
Do you know, I was there not so long ago. I'm from Waterford and I grew up in Waterford, but Tramore is only 7 miles away and it's the resort in the county of Waterford. So it was always a big thing for us when the summers came along. My father would always rent a place out there, either there or Woodstown, and Tramore is just a great little spot. Fantastic beach and an amusement centre. So as a kid, it was kind of magical for us. But we would always, if we were going back into Waterford, we would always stop at Cunningham's. And we would have a fish and chip or sausage feast. And we'd stop at Tramore Racecourse. We always pulled in at Tramore Racecourse, out of the way. And we'd either, some of us might get out of the car if the day was good or the evening was good, or we'd just eat within the car. And Cunningham's was a big part of our early lives, yeah.
Happy childhood?
Very, very, really lucky. because we had so much coast at close quarters nearby, we spent an awful lot of time on it. And, back then we were allowed, particularly with Woodstown, which is, not nearly as commercialised as Tramore would be. It's very quiet, Dunmore East. But we would have license to just roam and have a great day. And when we got hungry, we just come back to, wherever we were renting, and just say, "Ma'am, can you make us a sandwich, or, is it time for tea, whatever?" And those were great times. And we were lucky, and thankfully we all came through it safely. Because nowadays I think there's probably, less freedom allowed to kids because of, well, bad things can happen, obviously. So we were lucky we never experienced anything like that.
Yes, I don't think helicopter parenting was a thing back then. So
yeah, no.
Your dad was a footballer, wasn't he? Played a bit of League of Ireland?
Yeah, he was. I actually saw him. I saw him not playing for Waterford, obviously, but I saw him playing for his place of work, and I saw him play for a pub team as well towards the very end of his career. He was a striker, and I heard he was decent. I heard he was quite decent around the town, but maybe just didn't have that extra little bit. But he was a moaner. I saw enough of that from when I was a toddler. He loved to moan, and he used to say to me when I began to come through as well that, "Don't be like me, don't have a go at referees." He loved to do things like that, and he always ran the risk of getting himself sent off. But I was watching a decent player on the way down. He was fading by the time I saw him, so I used to, rib him a little bit when I got a bit older about it.
And what kind of sportsman were you? Was it just very much soccer, or more of an all-rounder?
Everything. I seriously, I just whatever came along, I would have a go at. I played Gaelic football, I played hurling, but I realised pretty quickly that it was a very dangerous game, and I cowered it out. I became a goalkeeper. But I didn't really want to play hurling. I went to De La Salle primary and secondary school in Waterford, De La Salle Stephen Street primary school. And I can remember that they'd turn up with the minibus that was taking him to whatever game they were playing in the county. And I'd say to my mum, "I'm not here. Tell them I'm not here." And she'd say, "You're going to make a show of us. You're going to embarrass the whole family. Get out there." So she never once did she back me up. And she always sent me out there. By then, I was kind of very keen on soccer, football. But I played squash. I played tennis, St. Anne's Club. I was a member there in Waterford for a while. And really, anything, because I was just ultra competitive. I just wanted to compete no matter what it was, a game of cards, anything. I had that kind of upbringing. And I had two brothers as well, one older, one younger. So there's plenty kind of sibling rivalry.
Yeah. You get your 10,000 hours practice in the back garden in pretty quickly, I'm sure.
We did. We hammered it.
So I know that it was maybe on the back of an under-17s Irish trip that Eamon Dunphy and John Giles and the Shamrock Rovers thing happened. If you're making the under-17 squad, you're obviously doing something. You were decent, very good, very promising.
Well, I can remember playing in a Waterford team, and I personally felt that there were probably about 4 or 5 guys in it that were better than me, just coming through the schoolboy system. And I don't know, I may never have been the most confident of footballers, but I was always determined. I always had that with me. Many people have said that to me over the years, that I always seemed to kind of find a way to plough on. And that's the way it was with me, because if I felt that I had made a mistake, or if I had a bad game, I would beat myself up a bit, and I just want to get on another level if I could. And that was the way I operated. It's almost kind of fear of failure all the time. I mean, I'm not the first to say that, but that's what drove me. And I felt, even when I was young, because I was like football mad, and my older brother had taken me for trials with a team he was playing for, and I was starting to really get the buzz, and I wanted more of it. I wanted to play, even when I was about 7, 8, I wanted to play competitive football, but I was too small. So I had to wait a little bit longer. And then I played for a team called Bolton Wanderers under 10. I was trialled and that went well. And then I joined Waterford Bohemians. And then I really began to make progress there. I started off thinking I was a left winger and that I could score goals, but I didn't have the footwork. So bit by bit, I ended up going backwards in my career. And by the time I got to Bohemians, I was playing as a centre-back or a sweeper, libero. I loved to play with, I did at Shamrock Rovers, Ronnie Murphy. And Ronnie was like, and I say this in the nicest possible way, bit of an animal. He was really aggressive. And I like to think, well, I could pick up the pieces, But yeah, I think once I got to my mid-teens, my dad started turning up more. So I kind of got the feeling that, something's happening here. They think I've got a chance now. And then I represented Munster at Gormanston College for the Interprovincials. And I could see Giles and Dunphy on the touchline that day. And we played Connacht in the semi-final. And we won 2-0. And I just thought at times I could turn it on and I made an impression. And then, as you mentioned, I got called up for the Irish under-17 trip to Cannes, and we played in a tournament down there, and that went quite well for me as well. And on the way back from that, John Giles had already departed. Eamon Dunphy was there in the airport with me in Nice. He said that we want to offer you professional terms. He was the first one that broke the news to me. So I was able to take that back to my mum and dad. And by then, of course, it was all getting, very serious.
And are your mum and dad thinking, oh, Jim, get a sensible job and don't be this kind of stuff? Or were they delighted, thrilled? Geez, Giles, Dunphy, Shamrock Rovers had a certain excitement at that stage. They were talking a big game and trying to do something very interesting. What was the reaction at home?
Mixed. It was both exciting when you first hear the news and encouraging. And then, hang on a minute, you're in your leaving certificate year. You've got, I had another trip as well coming up to Westphalia in Germany with Munster, which I went on. And I don't think my parents were delighted because that was all in the run up to my leaving certificate. But I don't know, I always had this feeling that it was going to work out, that I'd get there. My determination will get me there. I don't know where that came from, but it was there. And I did enough at school. I could have worked harder, but and my older brother, went to teaching college, St. Pat's in Dublin, and he became a teacher, and he was much more studious than I was, but I was much more sporty than he was, and that was always a factor in my life, and obviously, as I've said, soccer had taken over. So I think once that offer was made for me, whatever about my parents, I was kind of mature enough at that stage. I was going to take the chance. I wasn't going to miss an opportunity like that.
We had Ronnie Whelan on a couple of weeks ago, and he told the most, heartbreaking in some ways. He was telling it with a smile now, but he was talking about when he went over as a young teenager, and he said Sundays were the killer day when it came to homesickness. And his vivid memories of Sundays were sitting in the bedroom in his digs, listening to rebel songs, and imagining the family dinners back home and everyone around Finglas getting together and having, everyone's around. And he said it killed him. It took him months to get over it. So I guess you had the train back to Waterford, but you were up in Dublin trying to make your way at Rovers.
Yeah, I went through all the homesickness as well. But I was lucky. And I think that that spell at Shamrock Rovers that I was hoping would be my stepping stone to England, was great because of what I learned with John Giles, who was, brilliant in terms of how he saw the game and how he thought it should be played and how that influenced me. I mean, that was fantastic for me where I ended up. But if ever go on. Sorry. Yeah, if ever I felt a bit down or I needed reassurance, I was lucky because I'm not stuck in England. And having to kind of make a longer journey back to Ireland, I was able to just nip home. They didn't want me doing that. I was told that not to do that. They were trying to break me in, as it were. But I did it anyway. You know, if ever I had a couple of days here and there, even if it meant I had 24 hours at home, I would do it. You know, get a hug from my mum, bit of reassurance from my dad. That's all I needed to be able to go back and have a crack at the next phase. So, by the way, Ronnie always loved to sing song. So now I know where all that came from.
It's such a sad image. Ever since he said it a couple of weeks ago, I just think of the poor fella in his digs. You know, it's terribly sad
but again, they're you know, the homesickness thing. There are an awful lot of lads who travel to England from Ireland and didn't make it because homesickness played a big part in it. You know, it's all part. I went through all that, and I was desperate at times to want the kind of love I felt at home in Waterford, you know, and go out with my pals and all that. But you kind of realise after a while that it's all part of the job. It's sacrifice and dedication, and you have to just try and, again, put it to one side and get on with it.
Can you give us, so, I mean, younger listeners might be hearing John Giles, Eamon Dunphy, Shamrock Rovers, and not quite sure what's going on here. So we're talking kind of 1980, you go to Liverpool in 83, but John Giles and Eamon Dunphy with them had gone back to Rovers, and we're really saying, well, there are possibilities here for Irish football, and we could turn Rovers into something, and we'll play football the right way. And it was, you know, what a brilliant idea, and maybe we'll get there sooner rather than later with League of Ireland clubs. Can you give us a sense of how Giles and Dunphy operated then, what a training session was like, the type of football I can imagine that they wanted you to play? Give us a sense at that time on what they were trying to do.
Yeah, well, when I ended up signing for Shamrock Rovers, I don't remember Eamon being about much. It was really down to John Giles in the main. And, well, you know the way he liked to play the game. He loved a passing game. But not just for the sake of getting on the ball and just looking all kind of nice and stylish, and not you know, what, it wasn't that. It was with real purpose, with real ambition. He wanted us to be as good as we possibly could, and the whole thinking, the whole philosophy back then was to try and hold some of the Irish talent in Ireland, to bring it to Shamrock Rovers then. And it was a professional setup by the time I joined it. And for them to be able to try and compete on the European stage. And obviously, you know, if they brought the talent through strongly enough, then, you know, they could make money by selling it on to English clubs. But it didn't quite work out. We had a very good team: Alan Campbell, Liam Buckley, Jacko McDonough, you know, Alan O'Neill, Robbie Gaffney. But we get so far, we get nearly there all the time. We were like a nearly team. We played the football, but we didn't have the nous to be able to secure the results on the League of Ireland stage. And, you know, I think we finished second, maybe third, fourth, a couple of times, at least while I was there. As soon as I left, of course, it all took off, and they started winning doubles every year. But but we then began to realise that it wasn't working out, and that they were going to go back to part-time football. So obviously then that required us to get jobs, and Shamrock Rovers were helping in that process at the time. And I had a shout to go to Arsenal. I thought I was going to Arsenal, but that fell through, and I began a commercial course with Aer Lingus, not to work with Aer Lingus, but to do a commercial course on site there. And I was a week into that, in the process of maybe securing work and playing football part-time, when Liverpool came in. And I knew then that, this is a big moment. But Shamrock Rovers, I will always thank, and John Giles, because, and I've said this before, he changed me from a naive country kid, a culshie, into a much more switched on pro, a hardened version of a professional footballer, and what was needed to then take it on from there. He gave me great confidence and belief that I could go all the way.
So you're Bob Paisley's last signing. A 1-month trial, I think, initially is what they offered you, and
Yeah.
you get the good news at some stage across that month. What's the move over to Liverpool like? Like, where do you live? How does it all work in those days? Do you give it? I presume you're not given a flash nice apartment and a car.
No. Back in those days, I went into digs right beside the ground. I mean, if I fell out of bed, I was in Anfield. You know, it was right on Anfield Road. Mrs. Pike was the lady who ran it, and she was quite a stern lady. Couldn't quite work her microwave. We'd get fish cakes for lunch when we came back after training, and the edges of the fish cakes would be lovely and soft, but they'd be rock hard in the middle. So you had to be careful what she put down in front of you. But no, I think in city terms, I think Liverpool is quite similar to Dublin in many ways. So I found that part of it quite easy. But I knew straight away, and as you said, I'd kind of had a month's loan period or trial. And I played, I knew this had to be my chance, because obviously everything was breaking up at Shamrock Rovers, and I didn't know what the future held. You know, it was all a little uncertain. So, and Richie Bailey, who was going to be the next Liam Brady, and Richie was a cracking player at Rovers, had also gone to Liverpool slightly before me, and it hadn't worked out. So that was another, you know, thing that drove me, that kind of, you know, made me really kind of focused on the fact that this has to work. This has to come off. I have to get this right. So by then I was used to all the homesickness from Dublin, and so that didn't really bother me too much. And in my first game, we played Coventry for the reserves, and we beat them 6-2. Paul Jewell scored 4, and I remember thinking, God, this guy's good. And I managed to set a couple of the goals up that night. So I knew I'd made the impact that I needed to. And I played a subsequent reserve game, which went really well too. We won that comfortably. And after 10 days, I got the shout from Liverpool that they wanted to sign me. It was April time, so they wanted to get mine in as the last piece of business in the tax year. So yeah, I ended up actually rooming with a guy. We shared a house for a while called Dave West. He was from Weymouth in Dorset, and he had the cameras on him because they were making a program or a little feature, for Sports Night on the BBC. And Westy thought he was Bob Paisley's last signing. And of course, all his family are sitting around in Weymouth watching on this particular Wednesday night. And Bob Paisley's last signing, and I come walking out of his office and it's me. So he never forgave me for that. But yeah, that was absolute dream for me to make all that work.
And what's like Liverpool fan dad's reaction to all this?
I mean, immense pride. He had travelled over for the weekend when Bob Paisley picked up. I think they made him lift the trophy as opposed to Graham Souness in '83 when they won the league. He was there. I think they played Villa that day, so he was there for that weekend that I'd signed, and he was incredibly proud. He was a Liverpool fan all his life. So you know, I couldn't have picked a better team in that regard. Unfortunately, by the time I came to travel back for the 83-84 season and to start pre-season, he had passed away. So that was tough because he was my confidant. He was my shoulder to cry on, and that was hard. Getting over that was hard. But again, once I overcame the shock and the grief, it was again something that could drive me, could make me more determined.
Okay, because I had read that very sad news. Was that a total shock out of the blue, or had it been building?
Well, I wouldn't say absolutely out of the blue because he had a heart condition and he had to go to Dublin Bon Secours Hospital for checks on a regular basis. And he had travelled up there in one of those checks, and he didn't feel great upon arrival. And then they gave him some medicine, and then he felt good again. And I believe he was talking about me and what had just happened in my life. And he popped off his bed to go and get a newspaper. They had a little shop in the reception area, and he was going out to get the Evening Herald. And he collapsed there and then with a massive heart attack. So, you know, it was a blow, but there was a condition.
Okay. That's tough on mum as well. You know,
Yeah.
husband, son off to Liverpool. Suddenly, her world transforms in that summer.
Yeah, very. I mean, she was brokenhearted. I don't think she ever quite recovered from that. But you know, I had some siblings. I had a sister in America, and there were 6 of us in total: 3 boys, 3 girls. And so she had plenty of support. And you know, I was always calling home. I was always ringing home just to give her to try and prevent loneliness and to give her something to feed into. And yeah, we did all we could, but I don't think she ever truly recovered.
What's the step up in standard like then? You arrive at Liverpool, you've done well in the trial. Are you straight in training with first team? Are you serving your time training with reserves? What's the jump like? Where are you short? Because I know for much of 1984, for a start, Alan Kennedy is going nowhere.
Yeah, it was a big change. It was a big difference in the level of professionalism. And then the Mickey taking a course because you're a paddy in England. There was plenty of that going on at the time.
How did you find that? Some players, I suspect, we're all more sensitive than we might let on. I suspect some players did struggle with that, along with homesickness. You know, it's unfair to call it bullying now. It's really unfair to do that. It's of its time. But what we know now about each other and how to treat people, that wouldn't have suited everybody, to say the least.
Well, again, I channeled it in a way whereby I just made it a determination. I'll show you. You know, I wasn't one that I was going to react to it and get into a fight and behave like that, because obviously that could jeopardize things for me down the line. So I didn't want to be seen to be reactive like that and troublemaker. So I just channeled it into determination, you know, and I'll show you. And I went to the reserves initially. I played for the reserves, and they had a chance of winning. The A team was the 3rd team. They had a chance of winning that league, so they asked me to play in some of those games as well. And the reserve standard then in the Central League was quite good, and Liverpool had a habit of just winning the league practically every year back then. I think they won it 10 of 11 seasons or something like that. I might be slightly wrong there, but it was a great record. So playing in the reserves didn't make it any easier than playing in the first team, because they set you a standard and you had to adhere to that standard. And if you fell below that standard, then you'd know all about it. And I quickly learned that. But again, I go back to John Giles and how he coached me and what he had to say to me. And he prepared me for it, because I was set up to play the Liverpool way because of John Giles. I was set up to play the pass and move game. And that's all it was. And they drill that into you over and over again, you know. And I can remember actually before they asked me to sign that I had played the 2 reserve games. And I can remember Bob Paisley walking from the first team training at Melwood across to where the reserves were. And I thought, he's coming over to have a little look at me. He's coming over to clock me, you know. And yeah, and I knew then as soon as the signature went on the paper that my levels got to rise now. This is now a completely different ball game. It's much more serious. And if I want to get amongst the big hitters, I'm going to have to, you know, find a way of doing that. And thankfully, again, that determination, you know, led me through.
Yeah. So were you, like, in terms of breaking in and getting up to standard, were you the type who was meticulously watching your diet? Were you staying afterwards to practice, or were you kind of just doing what you were told, or was it somewhere in between? What was the Jim Beglin approach?
I was pretty much left to my own devices. I mean, in terms of, they say kind of that they wanted to care for you in the digs. Now, as it happens, and partially to do with the cooking at Mrs. Pike's, I changed digs and I went to Mrs. Prince, who was just a little further away from Anfield. I had to come up the hill on Utting Avenue. Yeah, so nobody was really checking on me, you know. And then with another player, ended up buying a house in West Derby in Liverpool as things began to progress for me. So they they offered me another contract. I got a raise in pay because I was making progress. And that was it, really. I mean, you were kind of told. I always remember Ronnie Moran, not so much with the reserves back then, but eventually with the first team. You know, they trained you to get you to a certain condition, and there'd always be a shout saying no golf and no shopping with your missus as you were leaving. You know, and that was it. The rest was up to you. Now, there was a drinking culture back then, not just at Liverpool Football Club, everywhere. I mean, the stories that are told at Norman Whiteside, Brian Robson, Paul McGrath are legendary at Manchester United, but it happened everywhere. It happened all over the place. That was it. And when I began to get involved with the first team by way of 13 man, there was only one sub in those days. So they'd start taking me on trips. And I'd get upset because I thought, well, I want to play for the reserves. I want to play a game of football. And somebody just said, shut up. You know, they're grooming you, as it were, for the first team. And they're giving you the experience. They're giving you a feel of what it's all about. And that was terrific as well. But when you got involved, then I was starting to kind of socialise a little bit more with the first team lads and become a part of it. But it was brutal. I mean, they used to play a drinking game called Buzz, and they just go out of their way to try and get you smashed. You know, that's the way it was. It was vicious. It was a harsh dressing room, and it was also harsh socially. Yeah. So I got swallowed up in that at times. We had a good time. There was no social media or anything like that back then. Mobile phones. To report on us, but we had some good times, yeah. And but nobody ever really kind of oversaw every little thing, and they knew that the players liked to have a drink, and that was all fine as long as it was done at the right time. And generally, that was a discipline that was served up by the players.
So as you make your way and you're getting into the team and you know the European Cup final, and there's Heysel, which is a big thing, I'm sure, for the players in the club to deal with, and then you segue into the double winning season and you're in the team. What's that like? How are you finding it? I mean, your standout memories, because you must be looking around saying, my God, I'm actually coping here. I'm actually in the team.
Yeah. Well, I can remember making my debut, and Joe Fagan told me, unfortunately, the day before on the Friday at Melwood, and I didn't sleep a wink. Yeah. And of course, I told my family, and I had a horde coming over from Waterford on the boat, and I met them off the ferry the next morning because I thought, well, I can't sleep, so I might as well. And I think at the end, I played in midfield that day, and at the end of that day, I remember Roy Evans pulling me to one side on the Monday saying, you know, you could have done better on the Southampton equaliser. But by then, it was like late in the game, Joe Jordan scored, and I was running on empty because I was just exhausted from the whole kind of excitement of it all. But I played midfield as well, which wasn't really my thing. But Joe Fagan always felt, and I know because he said it to Stan Prince, where the man who was the boss of the house of the digs I was in, he told him, oh yeah, Jim can play a bit. So I think he felt that I had a little more to offer by playing midfield, but I always knew I was a defender, wasn't really a midfielder. And then I think I played for Ireland in Denmark in a World Cup. I made my World Cup qualifying debut. We lost 3-0 in Copenhagen. And coming back from that then, I'd hurt my knee. So we were playing Newcastle, I think on the following weekend away, and I couldn't travel. So I was back out of the side again, which was a real disappointment for me because obviously you want to impact, and it had gone fairly well in the first game against Southampton. So you want to go again. You know, you got a taste for it, and obviously I had all the kind of emotion out of the way and all the excitement and the nervous energy, and I'd like to think I could have, you know, put that to one side and just got on with things again. But I had to wait my time, and I didn't. That was November '84, and then I had to wait until springtime when Alan Kennedy got injured. And then that was my opportunity, and I started getting a run then, and it took us up to Heysel. You know, thankfully I kept Alan Kennedy out of the team. I think he'd recovered by then, but I think Joe Fagan had enough faith in me, and to play in a game of that magnitude at that time was like, I thought, okay, this is the big time now. You've hit it. Now, obviously, that night is remembered for very different reasons, and it was a tragic outcome. And football didn't matter that particular evening. But for me, I wasn't aware of what had happened beforehand, and I wanted to win the game. I was desperate to win the game. I think we all were, in truth. And I knew, though, professionally, I'd made a big step. I was well and truly off and running, and I knew I could cope at that level. Mm.
So the double winning season, the following season, Kenny taking over as manager, is that, I mean, I guess that's the highlight in most respects. What's it like to go through a league winning season, and you're obviously winning more games than most? You're obviously going out as a team expecting to win a lot of games, and it's happening. It must be a kind of joyous thing.
It is. But amongst all the joy, you're threatened a lot. You're threatened with your place in the team. I remember Kenny would often say that, you know, if you want to carry on like that, then you're not going to be here next season, son. You know, not just to me, to others. And I always took offense to the likes of that. You know, I never revealed that to anybody else, but I just thought, I'm giving it everything I've got. Yeah. You know, I'm giving it everything I've got. What more do you want? But that's the way they were. They drove you. I think, look, we all knew after Heysel that there had to be a standard in terms of our behaviour, and that we couldn't be seen to have kind of cans of lager all over the coach while we're leaving opposition grounds. There had to be more behaviour, because we were being scrutinised then. And we obviously wanted to get back to, because there were no trophies won. And we lost the final 1-0 to Juventus in '85 at the Heysel. There were no trophies won. The Liverpool coaching staff didn't like that. Of course, Kenny was an immediate hit in terms of taking the reins from Joe Fagan, and there was huge respect for him. So that was a big plus. And we knew we'd be okay. Kenny was a manager, not necessarily a coach. The coaching was all done by Ronnie Moran and Roy Evans. And Ronnie Moran was the tough one. Ronnie Moran would berate you, and he didn't care about reputations. He had no respect for that. Didn't matter who you were. And through all his Rottweiler type rants, he would always finish, certainly with me, he would always finish with a line that was hard to come back to, because initially I didn't challenge him. And then I began to challenge him a little bit more. But he'd always say, listen, son, I'll stop moaning at you when I don't think you can get any better. Mm. Now, how do you come back from that? You know, he's more or less saying, I'm on your side. And it's like, it's not personal, it's professional, you know? So he was a huge driving force as well. And I mean, after I got my injury, you know, down the line, he never moaned at me again. And I missed that. I missed that terribly.
That's almost like him acknowledging,
yeah,
I might not be able to help this guy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's no doubt when they saw me lying on Goodison that night, and I don't want to go into all that, but I think they knew that was it. You know, that's it for him now. He's done for. But yeah, 85, 86 season was kind of mixed in terms of results, because we weren't necessarily hitting the heights through most of the season, but we were there. We were in with a shout all the time, and it's something Liverpool love to do. And Liverpool, because of their history, their experience, were always great down the home straight. Mm. And, you know, I can remember we lost to Everton, I think, in the February at Anfield, and Everton and Liverpool were the top two teams. Everton were a fantastic outfit at that time under Howard Kendall.
It was you or Everton winning the league. It was
incredible, really. Yeah. And Kevin Ratcliffe's hit one from 40 yards, which bobbled along the ground, and Brucey somehow didn't stop it. And then Gary Lineker knocked another one in. And then we knew that this is it. We're either going to find a way from here or forget it. And that team, when I look back on it, that team had a lot of strong characters in it, and great characters, a unit. And we had spirit, you know, and there was a lot of winners in that team, an awful lot of good players. And everything just kicked in. Kenny Dalglish as well returned to the side as player manager. He put himself back in. And I think his return just sparked everything. Everything just went up a notch. Because Kenny just wouldn't settle for second best. And you were getting immediate feedback if you had disappointed him in any moment of the game. You know, he'd snarl at you, he'd let you know. Right. So that all really helped enormously as well. And we just went on a great run towards the end of the season, both in the league. We won 11 of our last 12, drew the other up at Sheffield Wednesday. And I always remember Ronnie Moran that day, we drew 0-0, saying that could be the point that wins it for you, you know. And we kept going in the FA Cup, although we stuttered along the way. And an incredible end to that season.
Yeah. And so I guess, do you go back to Waterford then for a summer of Cunningham's chips and drinking and thinking, I've done it, I've arrived, I've made it?
There was a bit of that. I mean, I'm embarrassed to look back on some of that because I thought I was big time Billy.
Did you?
For a while. I did, yeah. I mean, I think I quickly learned that I was maybe, you know, I didn't do anything, I think, untoward. I don't think I was obnoxious.
Yeah. Do you know?
But I was a bit full of myself. Yeah, of course I was, because I just won the double with Liverpool. I mean, I got carried away on the wave, you know, but hopefully not in an offensive manner. Just me looking back on it, I just think, you know, you plonker. you could have handled yourself a bit better. You could have toned it all down. And I remember, like, even when I first got on the side at Liverpool, Ronnie Moran and Roy Evans would just wind me up because I was newsworthy. So I was appearing on every broadcast according to them, you know, and they'd just drop it into me, you know, what's it tonight? Television, radio, you know, or where are you making an appearance, you know, and just... And in the end, I mean, they used to try and wind me up before games because they all felt I played better if I was more aggressive. So they used to try and get me going. When I went back to Waterford, thankfully I realised that I was, you know, overdoing it a bit, and I backed off and toned down. But humility was what I was going to get at. Yeah. That was always a very strong thing at Anfield, because you get in on a Monday and they'd call you the big heads, right? Big heads this way, let's get going. And they try and slowly kind of bring you back down again, you know, and that's the way it was.
It was old school, but there was a wisdom to it, and they'd all seen it all before. They'd seen the young hotshots coming through, and yeah, a bit blunt, I'm sure, but probably required, and just take a few edges off so you can see the wisdom in it. I mean, if sports people die twice, like I can see how your son brings it up from time to time, because even I spent the morning obviously reading about you and thinking about you, and I got angry on your behalf the way it ends so suddenly. Yeah. 21st of January 1987, you're 23 years of age. It's a tackle, it's Gary Stevens, bad touch, ball bobbles between you. Alan Hansen famously said it was high and late, but aside from that, it was okay, the tackle. I get the impression from reading various interviews, you absolutely do not want to be talking about Gary Stevens or looking, you know, what, 30, however many years later, bitter about the whole thing and dragging him into it. He's got his life and you've got your life. Did you ever have any meaningful conversation with him about it at any stage?
Yeah, I mean, I can go into the time. I mean, I don't like talking about it too much, because I'm certainly not going to criticize and you know, go down that route, because it's gone. What can I do about it? I mean, I had to bury all that a long time ago, just for my own peace of mind, just to get on with things. But no, I can remember after it happened, word came to me that Gary Stevens wanted to come and see me. So Kenny came to visit me in the hospital, Kenny Dalglish, obviously, and he said to me, "Don't do it." And I said, "Well, you know, Gaffer," I said, if I had done that to somebody, I would want to go and tell them that I didn't mean to do that. You know, I went in hard, but I didn't mean for it to come out like this. And so maybe he wants to convey that to me. And he said, "I'm telling you now," he said, "all he wants to do is put himself in a better light and move on. You know, so it's going to be a PR thing for him if he does it." So I ignored Kenny's advice and I decided to accept his request. And he came to see me. And I immediately regretted him coming to see me, because I'm still all drugged up and I'm in a lot of pain. And he came in and he just sat there. And Clive Tilsley, actually, who was at Radio City at the time in Liverpool. He came as a kind of a mutual friend, not to be part of anything, not to report on anything, but he came in with him. I presume, Gary Stevens wanted somebody to come in with him. And he sat on the chair beside my bed, and Clive sat over in the corner. And he said nothing. And I'm thinking, what's the point? So I'm lying there, and I said to him, did you know you'd broken it? And of course he said, no. He said, I didn't. I went into the tackle, got up, got on with it. And I had just kind of immediately switched off. And it was very abrupt after that. It was very short because I think he got the message that, I knew I hadn't taken Kenny's advice. I was wrong.
Yeah. But understandably, you thought he was going to, if he's requested to see you, it's to come in the door and say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
That's what you would anticipate.
Exactly what I expected. And okay, I was drugged up and maybe I've got this wrong, but my memory tells me that that didn't happen. So he went straight to Matt Darcy, who was an Evertonian, and he wrote for the Daily Star, I think it was at the time. And then it was brought into me, the newspaper, the back page the next morning was, I don't blame Gary. The headline was, I don't blame Gary. So I'd fallen into the trap that was set, that Kenny alerted me to, and that I ignored. And I can remember as well then on the Saturday we were playing Newcastle at home. And I'd had all the lads in. All the lads came as one big group and took the mickey out of me and tried to cheer me up. But on the Saturday, we were playing Newcastle at home, and Kenny came in to see me early on a Saturday morning before he went to Anfield. And Kenny said, look, I don't want you to read this in the papers. I'm coming to tell you straight, we have to bring somebody in because Alan Kennedy had gone at that stage. We have to fill the space. And we're going to try and attract Derek Statham from West Brom, who probably would have had a bigger England career if it wasn't for Kenny Sanson. But anyway, he was a good little player. So I was very respectful of that and the fact that he came in to tell me, and I was aware of that. And then as he left the room, I won't mention the exact phrase he used, but there were an expletive or two in there. And he basically told me that you should have listened to me. You should have listened to what I said. And I regretted that. But, again, I'm a fairly logically minded person. I like to be glass half full. I don't like to think negatively. I always look for the positive in things. And immediately I began to realize that, I have to kind of, there was a lot of self-pity. Why me? I went through every emotion in the book. But you get to that stage where life is just going on without you. And you know that because I always walked into the dressing room before each game at Anfield and shook hands with all the guys again and wished them all the best. But I knew after a while that I'm not one of them anymore. It's not the same. It's all gone on without me now. And again, that's something I had to try and deal with. I think I dealt with it well, but when I look back on it now, I didn't. And I probably could have done with some assistance. It's all mental health these days. And I probably suffered at that time. But of course, the whole culture was about being a man, get on with it, shut up, behave. And I did. And I bottled it all up and tried to find my own little route towards better things.
So does bottling it all up and not talking about it manifest itself as a kind of unhappiness and anger? How would talking about it have helped, do you suspect?
I don't know. I might have been given a better reason, perspective in moving on in my life and accepting it a little more readily. Maybe it could have helped in that manner, but I was out for a long time. I was in plaster for 6 months, a full length leg plaster, because it was obviously a bad one. So I had a lot of days where you had to get off the crutches, and a lot of days just sitting around, and it went over and over and over in my head. And I hated it, you know. I hated the self-pity. I wanted to snap out of all that. And I hated the fact that it was going to take me a long time in rehabilitation. I couldn't do the simple things in life. I can't have a shower. I can't drive my car, you know. Even moving from A to B was difficult on crutches. And yeah, I probably could have done with some help. But you know, back then there were the likes of Ronnie Moran and Roy Evans were like coaches, but they were also your psychologists but I mean, they were nowhere near trained to kind of deal with things like that. And as I say, you know, that man's world that existed at that time, and that kind of insistence on just get on with it, stop moaning, you know, that was very prevalent. Right. And, you know, and I basically had to just cope with what was there. And, I didn't cope with it well. And I don't know, maybe talking to somebody might not have helped. Maybe it might have made me more angry. I don't know. But I would have preferred to have a go rather than remember the way it was.
Because there is no good answer to the question, why me?
Yeah, there isn't. But, you know, thankfully, again, and I don't know where I get this from, but that logic and that need to impose a perspective, you know, across the board, a wider perspective, really helped me out eventually in accepting the fact that I'm never going to be the same player again. And I wasn't. But I can still maybe carve out a career. Subsequently, playing for Liverpool reserves against Manchester United at Anfield, they were playing me in central midfield to get me fit. And I turned to help a ball upfield. And having broken my left leg 18 months before, I had a badly torn cartilage that particular night, and they had to take about 80% of it out, my lateral cartilage. So the next morning, and that was really tough, because that's what did me in the end. Because they had Mr. Metcalf, the surgeon, did an incredible job on my leg, because I think the medical term is comminuted, so shattered. So not only did I have a double compound, but it was like a jigsaw. He said, you know, he tried to try and put it, and he did an immense job on that. And I honestly think I could have had a career, maybe not necessarily in the first division, but certainly a level down. And then once the knee injury hit me, I knew I was in trouble then, because it's bone on bone. You know, you're just missing a piece of cartilage. They can do all sorts in terms of transplants these days, but not some grizzle in your knee. And I knew that the clock was ticking faster, and that I was on the way down, and I basically had to just try and get what I could out of it. But I then spent a period of time playing in pain, and I didn't enjoy that at Leeds.
And you used the phrase earlier that you've managed to get to a point where, for your own sanity, for the rest of your life, ultimately, because you're retiring here at 27 years of age. The injury happens at 23. You've had to compartmentalize it. So is that like an overnight thing where you say, you decide, right, I'm just not going there anymore. I'm putting this in a box. I'm not thinking about it. Or did it happen over a period? Like when you retire in 91 at Leeds, are you bitter and angry then, or have you come to terms with it? Like how long is this process of getting to a point where it's not a thing you think about daily?
Yeah, it was a much slower, steadier process. Because at Leeds, I suffered an injury almost on day one. It was the second day of running, and I had been married that summer, and Howard Wilkinson always expected his players back 3/4 fit. That wasn't like that at Anfield. You came back and you got into it again. I mean, a lot of the players would try and work on some fitness, but, you know, it wasn't absolute. But at Leeds, Howard Wilkinson insisted on you coming back at a reasonable level of fitness. And I remember I did a lot of road running because I went on honeymoon to Acapulco. And I had to get up in the middle of the night because it was the coolest time. And it was still roasting then. And I do my running then. And when I got back, I knew I was struggling for fitness. I hadn't been properly fit since I broke my leg. I hadn't been properly fit. I was nowhere near that level of conditioning again, because I at that time, I was like strong. Everything was beginning to go well. I'd learned from my mistakes at Liverpool. I felt I fitted in, that I could hold my place down for a long run. And all of that had been washed away. That level of confidence that I found had gone, wiped clean. And now I'm happy with the repair on my broken leg, but I'm constantly reminded about the fact that my right knee isn't correct. And there was an insecurity in my head always. And bit by bit, it just worsened. And I knew I managed to get 20 odd games, I think, and we won the league in the second division at the time in 89-90. And a few people have commented on the fact he did well to even get back to that level, But while it allowed me, I could do okay, but I knew I was never going to get a long enough period of fitness to be able to thrive again. And that I was on the slippery slope. And by then, I had begun to accept what was coming. What had started in 87 and what was ending in, was it 91? Mm. And looking back, I think I probably should have retired a year earlier, because before games I could only do straight stuff. I could only run and do straight work. And after games, I was walking around, in a mess. I was like John Wayne. Yeah. I was glad to get out. It was a relief for me. As much as it would seem to hurt me, because I love the game and it was my life, it was a relief to me when it was all over.
Yeah. And so you retired, I presume financially and every other way, the next 30, 40 years, 50 years are suddenly stretched right out in front of you. I mean, you're not retiring to your mansion and saying, I don't have to think about a thing for the rest of my life. You've got to make a living somehow. Did any part of you never want to look at a football again, be near it, smell it, touch it, have to look at it?
No, I don't. I had too much passion and love for it, I think, to go down that route. And again, I dealt with it all eventually. And because of that slower kind of process at Leeds, I was able to cope. So I was happy to go. What did hurt me was missing out on what Ireland were doing.
Yeah.
That probably hit me more than anything else, because I played in the first two qualifiers of Euro 88 and then I suffered my injury. And I remember Jack being very good, inviting me to Hampden Park in Scotland to stay, be involved with the squad, when Mark Lawrenson got the winner and really set us on our way. And then, of course, we qualified, and I wasn't in Euro 88. Now, I was watching it from my home that summer. And that broke my heart. And I'm not looking for sympathy here. And I did say, I'm the sob story at the start. But that was hard for me to accept, that the lads are doing this and I'm not part of that. That was really hard. Whatever about Liverpool, I think I dealt with that. But to miss out on that, and then of course Italia 90. Fortunately, I got to do some radio work in Italia 90, so I was close to it and I saw the lads regularly, and that was okay because I was close to it and I really enjoyed that. And that was my media start, as it were. So yeah. Ireland was tough. That was the toughest of all to take.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's no dressing that up. That's just...
No, there isn't. It is what it is. It's like, again, you kind of think, oh, why me? But I had to deal with that and think, look, it's happened. There's nothing you can do about it now. Yeah. And I can remember actually in 1990, Jack selected an enormous size squad initially before he narrowed it down to what he needed to take to Italy. And I had come off the season at Leeds. We'd won the league. And I remember in training, we got a big session in Dublin. And I thought, right, I'm going to show, what's what now. So I remember leading from the front to show Jack, Morris Setters, that I'm fit here. And then later on in the session, I broke down my knee again and I had to go back and ended up having another op for Leeds. And all of that was like, a dip into what I'd already experienced, and I was getting fed up with it all. So I knew I was missing out on Italia 90, but being there to do the radio work was a major consolation.
Yeah. There's, I don't know, did you ever read the Matt Hampson book? Paul Kimmage did it. He was the rugby player who was paralyzed very badly in a scrum in a training session. And so, you know, he was promising and, you know, hopefully going to play for England and all that kind of thing. And a big theme of the book is why me? You know, it's just a random scrum, random day, and he's paralyzed and very badly as well. And there's a kind of amazing chapter towards the end of the book. And I'm talking from memory here, but he details the other people who are in the hospital for people who've suffered spinal injuries. And it's full of people with the most innocuous injuries. Like there's a mother there whose son jumped on her back, and just whatever way it quirked, it resulted in terrible injury for her. There's somebody who slips getting out of the shower. All these different cases, and the conclusion he gets to is, you know, he says, why me? Well, why not me? Terrible things happen to people all the time. But when it's you and when you're in it, that's a tough accommodation to make. Is the media thing something that you were hoping to get into, or fell into it and did it, and geez, Italia 90 went, okay, I keep doing it, and suddenly we're here, what, in 30 years later, and you're still very much in demand? That's good going.
Yeah, I'm still getting away with it, I guess. Yeah. But Gabriel Egan is the one to blame for that, because right. I played for Ireland and he interviewed me a couple of times. I think he made the recommendation that, you know, he might be worth a try to do a little bit of COCOM or whatever. And it went from there. I didn't target it. I also had done a little bit of radio work in Liverpool and indeed in Leeds. And when I was retiring, Howard Wilkinson actually posed the question to me quite seriously, which caught me a bit by surprise, that what about a career in the media? And I said, whoa, I hadn't, because I thought I was going to go down the coaching route at that stage. I was doing my prelim badges at the time in Leeds. And of course, it's all, you know, licensed now, UEFA license, FIFA license. But so I thought I was going to stay in the game in that manner. And then I was doing reports for RTE, and I was doing a Liverpool Leeds game at Elland Road, and John Inverdale, I think somebody, one of his producers, asked me to do an interview with him because I played for both teams on Radio 2. That was heard. I did something for Sky, and it just went from there. And then Granada Television in the region kind of approached me, and off I went from there. You know, I didn't target that. I never particularly wanted to be a studio pundit. I was always drawn to the atmosphere and the fact that what you watch is fact, and you're just putting your interpretation on the fact. I found, and listen, you get some brilliant analysis in studio, and I'm not having a go at pundits. I just found it wasn't for me, because you're often asked questions where they're just kind of inviting conjecture, speculation. I just remember, you know, that's not for me. What are we doing going down this road? You know, it's just a kind of waste of 5 minutes. So yeah, I always felt that I wanted to work on the commentary side of things, and thank God I've been very lucky in life to.
Oh, it's going incredibly well. Yeah. The control freak in you is coming out there, because when you're doing your COCOM, you're in complete control. No one's asking you a question you don't want, and you're interpreting things and you're reacting to the things you want to react to. So in a sense, I know you have your commentator, but you're in charge of where you take it.
Yeah, I mean, you have a director in your ear, and now and again you might hear something you don't want to hear based on something you've just said. You know, if you felt you've maybe gone a little too strong or strayed outside the boundaries. So we got to be very careful for that. But it's true. It's true. It's my take. It's my take on what's unfolding, and I've always enjoyed that. I learned from the guys I worked with, the George Hamiltons, Clyde Tilsleys, John Champions, Peter Drury's.
That's a good list you have there, by the way.
That's not bad. That's not bad. You know, and I like to think I've had a good rapport with all of them. But you know, I learned from the way those guys just went about their work. Now, my job is different. My job is analytical, and it's very different to what they do in commentating through the names, all the moves, getting the goal scorer correct, all of that sort of thing, giving you the data, the facts. I don't have to concentrate on stats like that myself, but you can use one to justify a point every now and again. But I learned that I can do that in my own analytical way, and I think that helped me as well once I began to learn that preparation is pretty much everything. If you're prepared, you're ready to go on anything. So I began to do that, and things began to happen for me once I began to take it seriously. Once I thought, hang on a minute, this is my livelihood. Harold Wilkinson had said it. I didn't really take it seriously, and now I have a family. I have a young family that I have to support. So I need to start taking this seriously. I remember John Inverdale asked me a question once doing, where it was Radio 2 back then, or 5 Live. I was down at Birmingham. I can't remember the game. And there was something going on in the Birmingham boardroom, and he asked me about it just before kickoff. And I was unaware of it. And I couldn't answer him. And I felt embarrassed about not being able to provide an answer. And I swore to myself driving home that evening that can never happen again. I can never, ever be caught out about that again. Now when I'm going to do a game, and my missus always gives me stick because I'm always watching games in the planner. She said, it's just football. What are you, surely, you can. I said, no, it's 2 different teams than what I did the other day. It's 2 different ways of playing, different circumstances around each club. There's an awful lot you need to know. And if you want to do it properly, then you have to be prepared. And you have to start getting things right and have an opinion on what's going to come your way. And, from that point on, I began to realize, okay, now this is much more important, much more significant, and I've got to treat it as such. And I did.
Yeah, it comes across. I have to say, I think you're brilliant at it. I really enjoy when you're doing it. I find myself nodding along when you say things in your interpretation of player.
There are many that would disagree, Joe.
I know. Well, it's an amazing thing, especially in the social media age, how vicious the criticism can be of people talking about game football. But when you separate that 5 or 10% and you remember normal people watching, I think it really comes across that you're into it and you care about it and you think about it. And I wasn't sure if you were going to say that actually, because whether it was something you took seriously or whether it's just I go and I do it. I don't think too much about it. But I guess that's the old determination gene kicking in, the diligence, I don't suspect you let yourself away with it for too long if you're not putting in the effort. It'd nag you in the car home.
Yeah, listen, I'm not saying that that's the way everybody should do it.
Sure.
Everybody is a different personality, and you can go about it whatever way you want, but you have to do your job properly, which is being insightful and hopefully informing the audience of something they might not be aware of. So, I realized that was an extra dimension to what I was offering. I think when I first began to broadcast, I didn't do any preparation. I thought, well, I know some people have said to me, well, your career was preparation. Well, it wasn't really, because my career ended early and I still had a lot to learn about the game in general. And I did learn as I went along through my media work. I made a lot of mistakes in the early days. I'm happy to admit that. I probably went in with my standards too high in terms of assessment and judgment because of what I'd experienced at Liverpool. And I was probably overcritical in the early part of my broadcasting career. And I hold my hands up to that there were things I said that I might regret. But again, it was all part of the process. And I hope I'm more balanced and stable in what I contribute these days.
Sorry, last question. I've just had a lightning flash as you've said that. I hadn't even thought about this right until now. There's a Mick McCarthy documentary, isn't there?
Yeah.
There is, and it's you on the sideline. Does he refuse to be interviewed for you or something?
No, he did the interview. He did the interview. It was a setup, and I'm not going to mention any names. I was set up basically. Right. I was co-comming with George in Vilnius, I think, Lithuania, for that particular game, and we had a reporter on site, and yet I was asked to go from the commentary booth to the touchline to do the post-match interview with Mick live. And I remember thinking, why me? Yeah. Why can't a reporter do it? So Mick was unhappy at the time with something I'd said on RTE, and I rang him up. After it. He came towards me and he said to me something like, "You've made your bed and you can lie in it." And I thought, well, I don't want to answer him back, because if I answer him back now, I'm on camera and it could get silly, and I have to do an interview. So I had to be professional in the moment. And then, I asked him a couple of questions, and he calmed down a little bit at the time. And I rang him the following week, and I spoke to him, and he said, "You're criticising my team," and I said, "But I'm not criticising you, Mick. It's not personal." He said, "You criticise my team, you're criticising me." And I thought, okay. But he respected the fact that I rang him, and we were fine. I mean, we played golf not long after that together at an event down in Portugal. And I've seen him, many, many times since. And it's water under the bridge. Yeah. But I can assure you, that particular moment, I was totally set up.
Right. And a nice hint of a Barnsley accent that you threw in there as well.
Well, yeah, you shouldn't do that. Never do that with the lads, because you get absolutely slaughtered. But it's probably, nowhere near Barnsley.
What's life now then? Finally, are you living near Liverpool? Away from all the media work, what are you up to?
Yeah, well, obviously we're in lockdown at the moment. I'm doing a lot of what I'm doing with you right now. Initially I wasn't, but I was glad to get back doing this, because you go a bit kind of brain dead. You become lethargic with the lockdown. You just kind of, first couple of weeks, I just assumed, oh, this is going to take forever. But, we've tried to put structure. As a family, there's 4 of us here. We tried to put a bit of structure into each day, and not necessarily do everything together, but, we'll go for walks, or we'll watch this, or we'll spend time reading, or whatever. Don't do it as a family, but, and yeah, we're trying to make it work and kill the boredom. But thankfully, more recently, there's been talk of obviously the game maybe returning in June, but there's much more activity in terms of interviews, and I'm doing more and more, and for the Premier League as well, from Premier League Productions, who I work for, doing bits and bobs for them all the while we're not out there earning our crust.
Yes, well, hopefully normality is not a million miles away. Listen, thanks so much for doing this and for taking the time. It's been fantastic to talk to you about your career and hear about it, and continued success on the media front. And thanks again.
Thanks for having me, Joe. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
So it's been a while since we've talked. Daniel McDonnell of the Irish Independent, hello.
Hi Joe, how are you?
Very well. I am told reliably that you're on OTBM tomorrow picking the Louth Mount Rushmore. These are exciting times for you.
They are. I've had one or two sort of, I wouldn't say sleepless nights, but sort of thinking about one or two aspects. So yeah, I'm safe enough in my head about where I'm going now. But so don't talk to me about it. I think it'll get me distracted and give me a different opinion. So I'm staying focused on what I'm going with. I think,
I don't want to spoil tomorrow in any way, therefore I won't get too much into it. But can I just ask, who is Louth's greatest sports person? I can ask that without, where this gets interesting is when you get into who you're leaving out and pick number 3 and 4. Who is Louth's greatest? Who's almost certainly up there and nobody from Louth will disagree? People in Louth like to disagree. That's the one thing you need to learn about Louth, Joe. That's a guaranteed. But listen, I would have thought Steve Staunton would be fairly safe. Okay. Under every measure, played in 3 World Cups, first Irish player to get 100 caps, played for that great Liverpool side. I think he ticks every box, and I'd be shocked if he didn't satisfy every criteria. Shocked and appalled. There'll be a walk-off if he doesn't, by the sounds of things, tomorrow morning.
Yeah, as much as you can walk off, you can't really walk off anymore. You just sort of just disconnect your Wi-Fi or whatever it is.
Leave meeting.
Just shut the just press that little red X in the corner and get the hell out of there,
Well, that's on tomorrow morning, OTBAM. Yeah. What were you going to say?
No, I was just actually, you've set me off a completely different tone about how the course of history would have changed if Saipan and all these things that happened over virtual meetings. But I don't even want to think about it, Joe. Let's just move on to something
Why would
else.
you bring up Saipan?
I don't even, Staunton was there, that's all I'm saying. Just go on. On you go.
So it was a weak link. That's not a good enough reason to bring it up. So, a few things going on. You might just explain this story to me. I saw it today. I know the Irish Independent were on this as well. At Waterford, the manager, Alan Reynolds, was very unhappy at the treatment of players himself, I think, as well. What's been going on?
Yeah, so, what we have is a situation here at the moment where Waterford have decided to temporarily lay off their players, which unfortunately in and of itself isn't that unusual because other clubs have done it. St Pat's did it last week. Cork City have actually reverted back to a subsidy scheme, but Sligo Rovers at the start temporarily laid off staff, and clubs have basically taken this option as a means of coping with the fact that they have no income. What Alan Reynolds was particularly unhappy about was that he wasn't notified about it. There was no negotiation or discussion about it. It was almost a case of check your emails. And in fact, he did say it, he heard about it from another player, I think, in a WhatsApp group. Have you seen this letter? And at that point, that's where he saw the letter that they had basically been laid off. Now, obviously, being laid off, I suppose the language about being laid off is probably significant because people are hearing it a lot in football terms, and naturally in real life, people hear someone being laid off. It's like this furloughed. It's like this temporary laid off. It's a bit different. The Waterford letter does suggest that when football starts, the players should all be back. But as of now, they're not being paid by the club, and they're just on the COVID unemployment social welfare payment. And it's not that it happened, that's the shock, it's how it was communicated. But there is obviously a broader debate here about will other clubs have to follow suit if there's no clarity on when they can come back. And at the moment, clubs are availing of the wage subsidy scheme, which is covering up to 70 to 85% of wage bills. But even clubs are finding that paying that balance is too much for them with no money coming in. Okay,
so for Alan Reynolds, it's not so much the decision to lay off / furlough the players, in this case lay off, it's that there was no communication whatsoever in advance of this email arriving, and therefore the first he hears about it is from a player, and then he has to go and check his email, and it's all a bit of a shock. So it's the communication. It is the Power family in charge at Waterford, isn't it? They also own Swindon?
Yeah, that's right. So Lee Power is the owner of Waterford, and as you say, the owner of Swindon as well. And there is there's been a certain debate around the future of Waterford over the last year because Lee Power has maybe made noises that he wasn't happy over certain things in Ireland. Without going on a complete tangent, they were meant to qualify for Europe, and they ended up not participating in Europe, and his commitment has been questioned. But he does run a club in League Two at the moment, and League Two is a real difficult situation right now. So, it's not a good time to be owning football clubs. No. And if you're the minor partner of the two, I guess it's less so.
I was reading St. Pat's laid off players for 3 months last week. Again, this is a trend across the game. Give us the overall picture in the League of Ireland at the moment.
Yeah, so what you have at the moment, and it's a cousin of what's going on everywhere else to a degree, that there's a move towards a realisation that probably games in front of spectators this year are unlikely in what we consider to be normal terms. Now, obviously, that roadmap that was published last Friday suggested that games with restricted attendances might be possible from July, August onwards in some shape or form. But even that and how that would be policed and managed and made healthy and safe, like what we're seeing with Premier League and Bundesliga and everywhere, it's a massive debate. So what you have is that maybe the wealthier clubs, the Dock, Shamrock Rovers, the top two, they're very much in favour of pursuing closed doors games. They want to get going, if possible, where safe. They're open-minded to it. Whereas clubs further down, who are more reliant on gate income, don't have European money coming in this season, say, they're very, very reluctant to go down the route of closed doors games. But the one key point in Ireland, and maybe that makes it out as a bit different from other countries, obviously there's no TV deals here. There's no massive sort of sugar daddy in that respect, but the FAI have consistently indicated to clubs that FIFA have indicated there might be a support package available to help small or countries and associations. And what's been said to clubs is wait till you hear what this FIFA deal is. Maybe what they can offer will cover the shortfall that you think you will lose from not having fans in games and so on. And it's an equation. But while the clubs don't have those figures, they can't really commit to being supportive towards this, and they're taking cutbacks and measures. So there's a divide based along inequality, and with Ireland, it happens to be almost within the same division. Obviously, in other countries, it's within, from one division to the next, you obviously have a sort of a different feeling. But we're in limbo. Yeah. I mean, the simple fact is that everyone's in limbo. Everything is subject to public health approval. And we don't know, as in GAA, as in everything I'm sure you're talking about and I'm listening to, we have hypothetical plans. What we don't have is certainty.
There is a great time pressure on the bigger leagues. The Premier League are under massive time pressure. There is this very obvious, palpable sense of rush. When is the absolute soonest we can get back and do this? And that is a consequence, I presume, of the need for all that TV money. It is with Champions League and European places and UEFA wanting August on the horizon as well. All of those things are in the ether, and it is incredibly pressurised. And it's crazy when you take a step back from it and just look at sport getting itself in a tizzy over this, over economics. But when we look at League of Ireland, is that any less pressurised from a time perspective? Like, is there a feeling that, let's just wait until August, September and it's fine? Or do other things come into play, contracts, European football?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's probably at the outset of this, there was less pressure because, as you mentioned, it's a summer league. It's only 5 places, 5 games into the season. So at the start, they could probably, I mean, while no one was in a good place with this, obviously, there probably wasn't that sense of urgency initially. And the one thing that must be said is that there's a very generous wage subsidy scheme at the moment, which offers very good protection to people who earn in or around €38,000 a year. And there's not that many League of Ireland players. There will be some at the better clubs who are earning substantially more than that. But as a base level wage, it's a fair enough approximation of where a lot of things are. And in many cases, it might be lower. So, a lot of those wages are covered initially. But at the same time, once you start talking in terms of, okay, the season was meant to finish in October, say, November, the first week of the cup final. Once you start saying, well, okay, why don't we play until January or play until February? Naturally, players are under contract till November, and the issue of contracts becomes a bigger thing. And I know what you will say, and it's quite a reasonable point. Why doesn't everyone just pause and wait? They can do that at the moment to a degree when the wage subsidy scheme is helping, but there's question marks about the future of that scheme beyond June, or what form it will take when other industries start returning to work. And all of a sudden, the discussion about, well, let's wait until next February or push it back it becomes a slightly difficult thing to do with contracts because, I mean, players who are being laid off at the moment, I mean, in theory, as far as I understand, they're still owed the money that they won't receive in the next while. Like their contract an agreement will have to be thrashed out on their contract eventually. Like football is a weird business, and like even in the context of the Premier League and so on, like it's a very contract-based environment, and that's different to people who are obviously permanent salaried staff. Like it's different in football with sort of terms and conditions, and clubs who have 40-week deals with players here who then go and, you know, get other sources of income for the winter or whatever it might be. Once you start messing around with dates, it just becomes a small bit complicated, and I think that's where it's okay for a while. But if you get to June and July, say, and do you pay players while they're training, even if they're not playing? People say, well, let them back training. I heard Shane Keegan on the other day in the newspapers, like, well, players probably can go back training soon. But clubs, once players go back training, do clubs then feel like, are clubs then obliged to pay them, even though they're not still receiving any income as a club? And there's all these issues that have to be discussed. So everything needs to be, all the ducks need to be in a row. And that's why clubs probably, they need to know when they're going to be playing before they start paying players again in certain instances, you know, and that's where it's a messy one. And the lower down you go in football, the messier it has the potential to get with people who are on a very short-term precarious existence.
Meanwhile, the word from the Premier League, I must say, even every 24, 48 hours, it changes quite dramatically, and it also depends where you're reading your different bits and pieces. Like, there was talk of this meeting on Friday, or certainly over the weekend, via Skype, and it seems like there was an agreement of all 20 clubs that they do want to finish the season. But then I was reading Sam Wallace over the weekend, and he was saying that a lot of the lower clubs in particular, the bottom six, those looking over their shoulder at relegation, do not like the idea of neutral grounds. You know, Brighton have 9 games left and they have 5 home games. They don't want to give up that one extra little minutiae of an advantage of that home game because the stakes are so high. So I don't honestly know where we are in the Premier League, and that for a second puts to one side that ultimately the government will decide much. You know, the French League we're looking to finish, and that all went up in smoke very quickly. So the league have been talking. Gordon Taylor was on BBC Radio 4 today, and he said that one of the things they discussed in the meeting, and he didn't expand on this. He didn't explain why. He just said, well, we're looking at neutral grounds and we're looking at shorter halves than 45 minutes is one of the things they're talking about. It gets kind of more ridiculous. I mean, I presume it must be to do with conditioning. It's not like you're dramatically lessening the chances of spreading the disease if you're playing a 35-minute half or a 40-minute half, but really that just seems a bit silly. I mean, Brighton are talking about the integrity of the league and how they can't give up their home matches. I don't know what the great issue with players being a little bit tired in the last 15 minutes of a game is, or how that damages the integrity. I presume it's to negate against increased injuries. Fair enough, but like, we can just have a slightly slower paced match.
It's to do, yeah. I mean, it's obviously to do with the workload of players. And I mean, I saw Killian Sheridan speaking about he returned to training in Poland this week, and I think their schedule was something like 11 games in a month. And the Premier League are on about playing, you know, teams that could be playing every couple of days in order to get things finished. As you said, like, you just, contracts and all this stuff creates a bit of pressure to try and finish earlier. And the precedent of other leagues in Europe, winter leagues finishing, has put more pressure on the Premier League. They don't really have that ability to, as some people have suggested, almost wait until October, November or something. They can't really do that now with UEFA and other contracts and other leagues in England. So, yeah, I mean, there was a talk of introducing a rule for 5 substitutions rather than 3. And that even might become permanent, they were suggesting. So it's all to do with player fatigue and workload. That's what it's about. Nothing to do with sort of your level of exposure to the virus being increased or anything like that. But
it does favour the lesser teams. I mean, the longer a game goes on, the better team tends to have better chances of winning.
Yeah, you would
things
think.
Open up,
I mean, I know, of course. And I mean, you saw in France where now we have the first legal case being mentioned. I think was it Lyon, or certainly a club in France have been speaking about it. And if you have a situation where a club is relegated and they say, well, we only got to play 75 minutes against this team when they got 90. So like that one will never fly. It's something he said, as you said, he mentioned it in an interview I mean, that just won't come to pass. But the thing about the relegation issue and integrity of, I mean, what does home ground count without spectators? You could argue that, but of course, you have the familiarity of the venue. Maybe you feel at home there. But this whole issue broadly of where relegation stands, and that lies at the heart of everything here, because clubs in every league, in fact, you can say this anywhere, that if they return to football, you almost feel like they need to sign into an agreement beforehand that they agree to it now, rather than subsequently taking cases, against things if they don't work out for them. Because we saw West Ham have objected to it, and then I saw someone produce stats to say that their away record this year is actually much better than their home record. So you end up in the realms of serious whataboutery here. But I mean, the clubs that if football does return, massive if at this scenario, of course. But if the clubs that get relegated will feel within their rights to object. And I mean, this has always had the potential to be a much bigger issue than whether Liverpool are declared champions or not.
Yeah.
This is the one where, there's serious jobs at risk with aspects of what's happening here, and I don't envy the authorities, because there's no easy answers. There's none.
It's not. They may well look to the government to null and void this thing for them, although financially that's a bit of a disaster for them, so it's not easy. Dan, we will leave it there for the time being. I should just put any listeners' fears at ease. Dan has had a haircut, but it looks very nice indeed. That is a very passable job in the current climate, Dan.
It was a homemade effort. They don't do haircuts in marriage courses, but maybe they should. Maybe they should.
Listen, we'll leave it there for the time being. Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent. Thanks, Dan. See you later.
Thanks, Joe.